What would you do if you were locked up in an asylum under false pretenses and you have no way of getting out, but finally somehow you manage to escape, but the very same night you get arrested for a murder that you didn't even commit? Well, that's the plot of the 2016 movie Insane. It's a Korean psychological thriller, and it centers around a woman named Soo-ah and a journalist who is helping her, who wants to hear her story. And it is quite a story. I really love this movie. I thought the twist at the end is really, really good. It has some issues in how it portrays like asylums and mental health, but I think any thriller centering on an asylum does. For like all things considered, I think it is a really good movie. And again, it just like has a really good twist. So let's get into it. So the movie starts out panning across buildings of a city. It's the city of Seoul, and it is panning down to the street where we see a woman walking until suddenly she is slammed into a car by a bunch of men. And then we see her being strapped down onto a medical cart. It's like one of those medical carts, you know, where they like wheel you into surgery. She's like strapped down on one of those type of things. And then we get a shot of CCTV footage where two kind of nurse type people are dragging her across a room that has all sorts of like medical equipment. So it looks like it's in some kind of a hospital. And then we see a locked door in this hallway filled with other just like locked cell doors. And all of a sudden, though, that image fades into another image of the same hallway, except it's now abandoned and like covered in tarps, and something has happened here and we're not sure what. And then the title flashes across the screen, Insane. So then we switch to a scene in which a man named Mr. Na is being interviewed, and it becomes clear throughout this scene that he is some kind of like investigative journalist. He's being like referred to by the interviewer as the #1 in investigative reporting, and he runs a show called Investigation 24. But suddenly the interview is stopped because an assistant comes up and whispers something to the interviewer, and all of a sudden the film cuts, they're taken off air, and Mr. Na still doesn't really know what's going on, but he glances down at his phone to see a ton of missed calls. So he knows something really bad has happened, and as he's walking away, he hears some of the like assistants and like the film crew and stuff saying things along the lines of like, what is he even going to do? And like, oh my God, he is done for. So then we get a year later, it flashes to a year later, and Mr. Na, whose first name is Nam-soo, so that's how I'm going to refer to him here on out, he is looking very sad. He like in the interview, he was like looking very professional and put together, and he's wearing a suit, and now he is just giving sad boy energy. He's like in a t-shirt and jeans, and he's like wandering on a road and is like on the phone with people and is like yelling at someone about an article that they wrote. Presumably it's like about him and what happened, which we soon learn, because then the next scene is him in a car with his boss and they're talking, and we learn that there was an article that it seems like was about someone fairly high profile that had some inaccurate information, and his reputation took a really, really big hit. As a result, he got suspended from his job. And it's sort of said in this conversation or implied that the boss probably knew about it, but he took all of the blame so that his boss wouldn't get any of the the fallout from it. So he has some resentment over that, and now the boss is telling him that he's going to be put on this like ghost story show that his boss is like, you don't even have to like, they don't have to be true, it just has to be entertaining. And he like, Nam-soo literally wants no part of this. He could not be less interested in doing this show, but his boss convinces him. He tells him, this is your way back into the industry, and if you nail the ratings, you can get back to doing Investigation 24. You know, this is what you got to do to get back to where you were. And so he's like, oh my God, okay, fine. But he is clearly very unhappy about it. So then he has his first meeting with the boss and also his new assistant to talk about what story they should do first for the first episode. And they've got like a whole pile of, quote unquote reportings. And the one thing that interests him is there's this tattered old journal that was sent in. And he asks about it, and the assistant is like, well, that actually came for you a while ago. And his boss kind of dismisses it and is like, yeah, but like some people think you're still doing your old show. Like, don't worry about it. It's nothing. And the assistant, though, gives him some more information. So the assistant says, yeah, it's from, that mental hospital, the one that burned down a year ago and all the patients died in the fire. Well, that looks like it's the diary of one of the female patients who was there. And the boss, again, is kind of like, no, it's nothing. Like, we checked. There is no record of that woman having been there. That there's just no way. But Nam-soo is already dead set on doing this one. So he's like, no, this is going to be our story. We're going to check out this asylum. And so he keeps flipping through the journal when he's alone and sees a name written on one of the inside covers, Kang Soo-ah. And he is like, that name is really familiar and I can't place it. Where have I heard it before? And he just can't place it. We then switch to a scene where he is piling into the car there's like a bunch of actors in goofy masks, and he's like literally wants to die. He's like, this is the worst thing I can think of doing. And he is really not happy about it. But they go to the asylum and they're, doing some filming and stuff. And basically it isn't super important, this scene, but basically it ends with they hear a noise and they find a man injured, and they bring him to a hospital. And when they bring him to the hospital says he seems like he sustained really bad burns some time ago, and like he's in really bad shape. We need to take care of him. And so Nam-soo flips through the journal again, and he's like seeing that there's a tattoo on the man's arm that matches one drawn in the journal. So he realizes this must be the Nurse Han that is written about in the journal. And he is able to get the patient to confirm that his name is Nurse Han, but he isn't able to confirm whether he knew Kang Soo-ah or if he recognizes the journal or anything like that. And then his heart rate spikes and a bunch of doctors come in and they have to take care of him. Just as a side note, I will say the timeline gets a little confusing with regard to Nurse Han, simply because I was a little confused as to how this is supposed to work, as far as like, is he supposed to have been there this whole past year? Because a year has passed. It's not like it's been a couple weeks since the fire. So I was confused because I would have thought that either he would have died in the meantime because his wounds would probably have gotten infected, or he would have had to have gotten some kind of a treatment for all of his injuries, because if they were that bad, probably he really needed medical attention. It's kind of weird that it's like a year later he's in critical condition, where it's kind of like, then how did he survive this long? Like, even just as simple as if he's been at the mental hospital this whole time and never left, like, where was he getting food? And so that whole timeline, maybe I'm missing something with it, but that confused me. But honestly, it doesn't really have a lot of bearing on the rest of the plot. So let's move on. The assistant finds out that part of the reason there's not a ton of information about the fire is that the same day a police chief was murdered. And so all eyes were on the murder of the police chief. There wasn't a ton of resources left over for investigating the fire. And they look a little bit into the murder of the police chief and find that his daughter was arrested for his murder that very night. And the name of his daughter? Kang Soo-ah. So they talk to the police about this, trying to get more information. They basically are assuming, they being the police are assuming that this is all nonsense. They're like, yeah, she claimed to have been locked in an asylum, but it's a load of crap. Like, there's no way. Like, we have no one to corroborate that. And they go on to explain that her mother had died several months beforehand. So there's really no one living who can corroborate that, yeah, she was like not heard from for several months. And she, yes, she could have been locked in a mental hospital, basically. There's no one to be like, yeah, that story makes sense. And so without any corroboration or any evidence of that, they're like, it sounds like it's just an excuse, is kind of their line of thinking. But Nam-soo is able to convince the police to let him talk to her, basically because he has dirt on the policeman. And so he's just like, okay, fine, whatever, you can talk to her. So he goes to talk to her, and he talks to a doctor before he talks to her, who tells him, you really need to treat her as a patient, not a criminal. Like, she's still very, very fragile. It seems like because of her mental state, she's being held in some sort of like prison hospital type of place. Except this one is, ironically, I did kind of notice a little bit of an irony in that, is this also kind of a mental hospital of sorts? But like, it's not a mental hospital like the other one was. So like, clearly this is like an actual, like, legit hospital. It's just kind of, there's an irony there, I feel like. But anyway, moving right along. He goes to talk to Soo-ah. She is sitting on this bench outside, and he tells her his name is Detective Lee. So he's lying to her about who he is, but he gives her his card, which, again, that's another, like, kind of confusing point, because I'm like, does his card say Detective Lee? Because if not, like, it probably, like, you probably should have just, like, said your real name from the start, but whatever. But more significant in this scene is he does notice, despite her not saying anything, he does notice there are significant burn scars on her hands that look like they have since, healed, but there's, the scars remaining. And so it's another hint to the viewer that she was there the night of the fire. But anyway, moving right along. So then he orders the assistant to gather more information on the murder of the police chief, trying to get more detail on what happened there as well, because it seems like all these things are somehow connected. And she's actually kind of confused, and there's sort of this dynamic of almost like the grumpy sunshine dynamic, except not romantic, but just like, in a workplace relationship. It's that kind of a vibe where because he hates like the show that he's been put on, and he's really resentful of it, he kind of takes that out on her at points. And in this scene, she kind of finally pushes back and is like, okay, I don't understand why you're having me look into this, but like, just tell me what you need me to do. Like, don't treat me like an idiot. I graduated from a top university. Like, I know what I'm doing. And so I kind of like this scene, because this is where I'm like, I could have seen this as I could have seen their dynamic working in like an investigative procedural drama or something, but it works great in a standalone as well. But I kind of love the sort of dynamic between Nam-soo and his assistant. But anyway, moving right along, later on, she debriefs him on what she finds out about the police chief's murder. So in short, the police chief married a woman who had a young daughter many years ago, obviously, because that young daughter was Soo-ah, who is now grown. But also that the mom died 2 months before the murder, which lines up with what the police had told him. And Nam-soo meets with Soo-ah again, but this time he is honest about who he is. Again, like, feels pretty counterproductive in the first place to have lied and given her your car, whatever. Anyway, he says that he saw the paintings she did in college, because she was like a fine arts major, and he notes that the paintings were warm but lonely. And she sees the journal and asks him where he got it. He doesn't answer her, but he asks, is everything in this true? And she says, she basically is like, I never killed anyone. But then she's like, you're not going to believe me anyway. So what is the point? Like, why am I going to try and defend myself when no one's going to believe me? That's kind of the vibe she has, is like, no one has listened to her. And he basically says, you're right. I don't believe you yet, but I'm at least willing to hear your story. And that's more than anyone else is giving you. So you may as well tell me your story. And, the kind of implication is maybe you will convince me in the course of that story. So let's hear it. So then we go into a flashback, and it's kind of like the same scene as the opening scene where she gets taken. And there's more detail this time, though. In particular, there is a part of this more detailed version where it's actually very difficult to watch, I think, where after she is taken into the mental hospital, she is being scrubbed down, and they like force her out of her clothes and into the shower and are scrubbing her down. And she doesn't understand why she's there. She doesn't understand like how they're able to even lock her up when, there is no, she's not had any indication of like mental issues or anything, presumably. That's kind of the implication that we get, is like, there is absolutely no reason for this, and she doesn't understand why she's there. And So it's a very emotional scene because you can just hear her sobbing, and that's where it like was kind of hard to watch, because you can almost feel how like violated she feels in that moment, where like, you know, she can't make any decisions about this, but she doesn't even know why she's here. Soo-ah is taken to see the director. She is gagged, so she can't actually say anything to him. But he just tells her it's a mental hospital and we're going to make you better. But then that's immediately followed with a scene where she is being viciously beaten by the nurses. So it's this very, like, it's making it clear this is a very shady place. Like there is nothing upstanding about this place. And you immediately, I think you immediately get this like very creepy vibe from the director. Then we see Nurse Han coming to see her, and he gives her medication. She begs him to help her. She says, please, like, I'm not crazy. Like, I don't know how I ended up here. I don't know why I'm here. Like, can't you at least tell me who ordered me here? Like, and then she grabs the pen he's holding, because he's holding like a form, like for him to take some kind of notes or something. And so she grabs the pen from him before he can stop her and scribbles down a phone number before he manages to grab it back. And he tells her, you can't have that. Like, you can't have any sharp objects. No, not even a pen. And she's like, okay, well, just call the phone number I wrote down. Just call this phone number and they will sort the rest out. Just call them, please. And right after she has written down the number, another nurse comes in and sees she hasn't taken her medication yet and grabs it from Nurse Han and like forces it down her throat. So this is also showing us that Nurse Han doesn't have the same like sadistic streak that a lot of these other nurses working there have. Like, Nurse Han doesn't seem to enjoy the patient's pain or anything like that, whereas the others really seem to like almost get a kick out of how they horribly mistreat the patient. Sorry, I had to change up some of my setup here if it looks a little bit different. But returning to this, the next scene is a woman named Miro comes up to her when all the patients are kind of in the general area. And she says she was also kidnapped, but then she starts talking about how she like ate a whole tub of Vaseline and it blocked her womb. And she starts telling Soo-ah to give her womb. So clearly Soo-ah feels, okay, she's not actually in a good headspace to be able to help her. But she does mention that, quote, only the perv knows the way out. So keep that in mind. Again, when the director examines her, Soo-ah tries to tell him that she shouldn't be there. He clearly just does not care. Now, in the present, we find out from the assistant that the director was also a friend of Chief Kang. She also finds out that the mother owned a lot of property. It was worth a lot of money, and it was transferred to Police Chief Kang the day before her death. So that's very sus. In another flashback, Soo-ah sees Miro leaving her cell at night, and we see as the viewer that when she leaves her cell, she goes to the director's office, and he says, do you want me to unblock your womb again? And basically he essays her, because clearly she is not in a headspace to consent to anything. So he's even more gross than we thought. Back in the present, Nam-soo says not to tell Soo-ah about Nurse Han being alive just yet, because he's afraid that if she knows, she'll only want to talk to Nurse Han and won't talk to him. They start talking to some experts who explain that it's very possible, the way the laws are set up, for someone to be sent to a mental hospital who shouldn't really be there if someone has nefarious reasons for doing so. They also explained that there's financial incentive because the government pays subsidies for each patient. And so there are almost these brokers for mental hospitals, which is really messed up. And then they also find out that the director got in trouble for drug distribution and also was sued by a patient's family. And the police chief made both cases go away. Really not good. But they're like, let's get more details on why he was being sued. And so they go and talk to the family that sued, and they find out that the girl's father, who was in the mental hospital for alcoholism, he was missing a kidney when he came out. Like, he was in pain, and so he goes to the ER, and they find out he's missing a kidney, and he had it before he went in, and that's the only time he got hospitalized, so that's definitely who took it. And then when they asked Soo-ah about it, she's like, yeah, I did see people going into the OR and not coming out, so I don't know, but that's very suspicious as well. In a flashback, she again talks to Nurse Han, but he clearly is not helpful. He clearly did not call the phone number, and so she, in looking for another way out, she talks to the guy who Miro calls the perv, who is on the other side of her cell, and there's a hole in the wall. And he basically says that he will trade the information of how to get out, which essentially is the code to the director's office. And there is an opening in the closet in his office that you can get out from, and he'll trade that basically. And so she is clearly not happy about it. She is like twisting a ring on her ring finger. So that's when we realize she probably has a husband back at home, and she's feeling very conflicted about what she's going to have to do to get out of there. And now, to be clear, I definitely would classify this as for sure an essay scene. I would say, if anything, it's actually like very difficult to watch. I was very uncomfortable with this scene. And honestly, it could be kind of triggering for some people. It's not the worst that I've seen, but it is definitely, it's very clear she does not want to do this and is only doing this because this guy is holding the information, you know, over her head. And so clearly this is not a consensual thing. Anyway, though, the scene ends with her biting him, and she then goes and tries the code he gave her when everyone else is like running in. And the shower area, there's a lot of like curtains and stuff, so it's very easy for her to slip out of sight and people to not realize she was there and think he's alone and not know who like caused this injury or whatever. So she runs to the side, tries the code, and it's not working. And she asks Miro, and she's like, Miro, you know the code, don't you? Like, what's the code? And Miro is not responding. And she's like, oh God, like, but then she realizes Miro is doing this tapping motion, this like, it's like this motion, and she realizes, and Miro's been doing, like, she does that tapping motion in other scenes, and Soo-ah realizes that whenever she does that tapping motion, she's mimicking like tapping in on the keypad. And so Soo-ah copies the motion and like hits whatever numbers, you know, accordingly. And she gets in, and she manages to basically slip into the closet, and there is a hole, and she's able to climb into the walls and like sort of climb through the inside of the building almost, and emerges in like the subway station. And she comes out of the subway station. She's still wearing her hospital gown. She's bloody. Like she is not looking good. And she gets picked up by police because, like, obviously a concerning sight. And she tells them what happened, but unfortunately she realizes it's too late, that they drive her right back to the mental hospital. And she doesn't realize until she sees the two nurses come out and grab her and drag her back in. And they like viciously beat her. And then she wakes up on an operating table, and she looks beside her. There's another operating table, and it's just like covered in like a pool of blood. So she knows nothing good is coming after that. Now, back in the present, Nam-soo talks to his boss, saying that the number of the bodies in the fire isn't matching patient records. And that means there must have been more patients that weren't supposed to be there other than just Soo-ah. And it seems like they were probably mostly people without homes, or who didn't have any close friends or family, people who basically the mental hospital thought would not be noticed as missing. And then Nam-soo does talk to Soo-ah again. It's interesting because whenever he refers to the police chief as her father, she seems confused and says her father passed when she was little. So it seems like she doesn't even associate him as like her father. And he's trying to push her to remember more, but she is seeming almost like confused. And it seems like she has repressed some of the memory of being there, and he says they need to make her want to remember. So he films an Investigation 24 segment about the case, and we're seeing this segment. And they're showing the experts talking about how people can be locked up illegally. They show Nurse Han with his face blurred out to protect his identity, talking about how Soo-ah was there. Side note, it's not actually Nurse Han. We get that Nurse Han disappeared at this point in the story. And so we get that it was probably just someone random with their face blurred out because they needed to push Soo-ah to speak up with them. And so in response to this segment, there is public outcry, and Soo-ah does agree to meet with them again. And he tells Soo-ah of the connection between the director and her stepfather and how there's all this connection between them, that it seems like they were kind of in cahoots. Then we see another flashback because she says to him, okay, there is something I never told you. So we see flashbacks of a young man who is desperately trying to talk to anyone who will listen to him about Soo-ah being missing. And we can gather that this must be her husband. We see him desperately calling press, trying to talk to police at the police station. No one will listen to him. Then back at the mental hospital, Nurse Han is moving a bunch of boxes, and one of them falls, and the lid falls off, and he sees there's a decapitated head inside. He's horrified, but the director is standing there, and he slaps him and says, where do you think your high salary comes from? And so he's very afraid, but he goes and sneaks off and calls the number that Soo-ah had written on her form. Obviously, that's the young man. Says, you need to come quickly. I will help you get in, but come fast. And when the young man arrives, he almost runs into the police chief, but he manages to hide in time. Now we see that the police chief is meeting with the director, and he's given Soo-ah's death certificate. They agree it's going to be kept secret, but then the director asks him about the hospital site. So presumably that's whatever he was supposed to be given in exchange. And the police chief basically just dismisses him, and you see he is livid about it. The director is really angry. So Nurse Han and the husband find Soo-ah, and they manage to get her off the table, but as they're going to escape, they run right into the director. So the director, they're being beaten, they're on their knees, and the director tells Soo-ah that he is going to cut her open, take all the organs, and sell them, and he shows her death certificate. We then start seeing intercut scenes with Miro going into the director's office again, and she is starting to light candles. And then we're back with the director and the others, and they're dragging her husband onto the table, and he says to him that a younger bitch's body gets a higher price. So he's going to start with the man, and he cuts down the man's abdomen, almost a foot-long gash with a bone saw, and that one's also difficult to watch. Meanwhile, Miro is still in his office, and we're seeing more scenes of her intercut where the candles are covering every surface. She can barely find places to tiptoe because of it. And meanwhile, then we're back with the others, and the man is thrashing, but someone stops the doctor. And when he turns, he sees, you can see the raging fire from the end of the hallway because of all the candles. They lit it on fire. And of course, there's so many of them that it's really spreading fast. And so he runs off to deal with that, and they try to escape. Miro comes past, and Soo-ah convinces her to untie them, and then they struggle a little bit because Miro is still kind of in these delusions, but without going into it too far, Miro ends up running back towards the fire. So they are about to escape, and the doctor comes out, and his whole body is on fire, and he collapses, and they manage to retrieve the burned and almost melted key card that gets them out of there. And they're pretty sure they can still use it. So they're about to leave. They manage to get up despite the husband's wounds and everything. And just as they're about to escape, the doctor drags him back because I guess the doctor wasn't quite dead yet, and he drags the husband back into the fire. And so Soo-ah is the only one of them that emerges from the mental hospital that night, because the husband is dragged back into the fire and the rest of them die except for Nurse Han, who of course was discovered earlier. Now back in the present, Nam-soo is really still set on figuring out what happened to the police chief. So he's asking about the murder of her father. Again, she says her father died when she was little. He tells her that the truth can help her in her trial, like he just wants to know the truth, and she's getting increasingly agitated. He asks who put her in the hospital, and she keeps telling him she really doesn't remember, she doesn't know. He starts showing her photos of her stepfather. He's getting kind of aggressive with her, and he starts saying that he thinks she always hated the stepfather. She moved out first chance, took whatever job she could get just so that she didn't have to be around him. And the stepfather visited her to try to improve the relationship, but she grew more violent and angry, and that's how she ended up in the mental hospital. He also says that she must have been angry that her stepfather got all the money that her mom left behind. So then Soo-ah appears to have some kind of almost like a break, and she basically breaks down in this moment. We see that in her mind, she's getting these just like little flashes. And honestly, I'm not even sure where some of these fit into the timeline. One of the most important things that the flashes do convey is, and I will just kind of sum this up, is one of the things it conveys quite clearly, in my opinion, is that there was SA going on by the stepfather towards Soo-ah. And, now, some of them where I was a little uncertain of the exact time frame of them is like there's one where he looks like he's like lying dead on the floor, but he doesn't have any pants on. And I was kind of unclear on that one, if that's actually supposed to be the night he died, or if maybe he's just supposed to be like passed out after having SA'd her. It's a little confusing. There's also a flash of a scene where the director is turning to her and saying, "Say hello to your father." And it's like during the meeting where the police chief was meeting him in his office. It's like during that same meeting. And then there's one where she's kind of like cowering from the stepdad. Overall, though, I would say these flashes like give you insight as to the nature of the way he abused her. And she is having a breakdown. She's saying, "Did you see what he did to my mom? Did you see what he did to me?" And like sobbing. And, you know, so basically the medical staff have to intervene at that point. There's another flashback now where she's following the stepfather, and there's a voiceover from her saying that she wanted to kill him, but he was already dead. And we see that he used the gun on himself. In present, we see the second half of the Investigation 24 segment revealing everything that the police chief did, including Soo-ah saying he had SA'd her for years and that she maintained her innocence of the murder. They also have an autopsy expert talking about how the amount of drugs in his system indicate that he was an addict, and with his stepdaughter having escaped from the mental hospital, presumably he couldn't face like having all his crimes outed to the public. It concludes with them saying that they want a reinvestigation, viewing Soo-ah as a victim rather than a suspect. We then see her original verdict, where she was convicted, being overturned. Then Nam-soo is talking to his boss, who shares little tidbit that the mom's death certificate was also signed by the director. So maybe the director and the police chief were behind her murder as well. Nam-soo then drives Soo-ah to her home. She is opening the window, leaning her head out, breathing the air as a free woman for the first time since all of this started. Because remember, she gets arrested the same night of the death of the stepfather. And so this is really the first time she's been free since before the mental hospital. And right before she goes inside her home, she leans back down and hands him the journal and the pen and says, "You know, when you're in a mental hospital, they don't let you have any sharp objects, not even a pen, because they could be used as a weapon." And we see him kind of putting it together what that means. Because if she couldn't have a pen in the mental hospital, how did she write a journal? And as he's piecing it together, we see flashes. Nurse Han saying no sharp objects and taking that pen back. We see him first flipping through the journal. We see him meeting Soo-ah. We see the conversation about the man coming to rescue her, and it clicks into place. Then we see her taking off her dress, and on her abdomen is a long scar, the scar from the bone saw. And over her shoulder, we see a photo of a little baby being held by a man, the man from those flashbacks, her husband, except it's not her husband, it's her father, and he died when she was young, as she said numerous times. And now we see all those flashbacks of the man calling and begging someone to listen again, except it's not the man, it's her. It's Kang Soo-ah. She is the one who was calling. And that's how Nam-soo knew her name, because she called him saying, my name is Kang Soo-ah. I can't find my mom. They won't let me file a missing persons report. But he's busy with something else, and he basically hangs up on her. But that's how he remembered her name. And now we see several of the scenes in the mental hospital, like little flashes of them, and her mom is the one who is there. And then there's the final scene in the fire. Her mom is dragged back into the fire by the doctor. And we see her follow the stepdad. And this is the one last reveal, is we see that she did shoot him. Except now we understand all of why she did it. And then there's a flashback of her looking at her mom and smiling. And the last shot of the movie is her hearing a knock at the door and looking over her shoulder. And this is somewhat up for interpretation, but my interpretation is that Nam-soo will be coming to talk to her, but that he won't be revealing this to anyone else, and that he's going to tell her that even though he put it together, he's going to keep her secret. Because I think, based on everything we know about Nam-soo, I think once he realizes this, it's kind of like, even though he's been trying to get the truth of what happened out there this entire episode, essentially justice has been served at this point, and I don't think he's going to bring this information forward. Also, technically, I don't know if he put together the part about her having shot the stepfather, because the big reveal that he, I think, pieced together was that she was not the one in the mental hospital. So I don't know that there's anything with that really necessarily would indicate that she shot her stepfather. The viewer sees that, but I don't know that he realized that anyway. But I think they're still kind of leaving it up to interpretation as to whether you think he's going to want to have the exactly correct story out there, or if he's going to kind of see this as, you know what, the truth of it, in the sense of the truth of the matter is essentially out there. Even if not every little fact is correct, people have the real story in all the ways that matter. And that is the movie Insane. I really liked this movie. Again, did I love some of the parts where they're in the asylum in terms of how they portray mental health? No, not really. But I also, to be honest, when I hear, you know, a thriller set in an asylum largely about someone being in an asylum, I really am kind of like anticipating, honestly, that they're probably not gonna nail that part of it. That aside, I really liked it. I thought it was a very good twist. And that is it for the movie Insane. I really hope that you enjoy this. If you like this video, if you enjoyed this recap, definitely let me know in the comments, or leave a like or a subscribe. I'm getting started here, but you know, I may do more of these thriller recaps, so let me know if you'd enjoy more of them, and feel free to let me know if there are any particular ones that you'd like recapped. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.